Okay, we're going to put the frame in the chassis now. We need the chassis, we need the fuel tank that we assembled back in step 2. We need the fuel tank retainer plate out of the kit, as well as the two fuel tank bumpers that are left, a couple of M3x6 socket heads, a couple of M3x8 socket heads, about 6 inches of Velcro, about 3 feet of Tygon fuel line, a couple of fuel line plugs, a T-fitting, some blue thread lock, and an M2.5mm hex driver. Install the two fuel tank bumpers on the fuel tank retainer plate. There's a threaded insert in these, so it's fairly easy to figure out which end threads into the bolt. This is the orientation it's going to go onto the model, so you want to make sure you put the tank bumpers on the opposite side. The long side is going to be the front of the model, and you want that to be on the outside as well. Once the fuel tank goes into the chassis, it's not very easy to access the fittings that are on it. It's a fairly tight fit. So what I've done is go ahead and connect about a foot of Tygon to each of the fittings in advance, and then we'll trim them to the right length once the tank is installed in the chassis. Again, if you followed how I plumb fuel tanks, I use 4 connectors, a vent, a fill, a return, and the fuel pickup. The vent, obviously, I'm using this one-way valve, so it doesn't need to be very long. Some people like to use fuel loops. That's perfectly okay. You want to make sure you get enough tubing on that fitting before you put the tank in that you can loop it, or make that loop and then put that inside the frame, because again, it's going to be hard to get to these fittings. Once this is all in place, we can put the tank in the chassis. Back when we put the right frame together, we put a couple of frame bumpers on it. That's going to go into these receptacles on the left side of the tank. With the fitting on the front, the tank is actually wider than the opening is. So the way you want to put this in is slide it in like this. Move it around until it seats on the bumpers on the other side. Now we can finish attaching the tank. Take the tank retainer we assembled earlier. Those bumpers go into these 2 insets in the tank, and then we're going to use M3x8 bolts to attach this to the frame standoffs that went on with the left frame assembly. Now that the tank is retained, the good news is the tank is fully supported by rubber dampers. So most of the vibration that often gets pushed into the fuel tank is going to be absorbed by those dampers on this model. So now we can finish plumbing the tank. There really are a lot of different ways you can final plumb this. In the example I'm showing you, I've got the fuel feed which runs directly into the carburetor. I never run T's in that because it's a chance to pick up air bubbles. If you've got a filtered clunk in the tank, you don't need a filter on it. The return valve, which I put a T-fitting in to use as the fill vent, and then the fill line. In both of those cases, I put fuel plugs on the end so I can just remove them, fill through the fill plug, let the overflow come out the overflow. You want to put Velcro on them to retain them. You want to make sure anywhere that the fuel tubing is close to graphite that you put Velcro so that it won't cut the line. Now this is one way that you can exit it from the frame. I'll show you a different way. There's enough clearance between the frame retainer plate and the frame. You can actually route the fuel tubing between the frame and this plate. Just make sure you've got some Velcro around the fuel line so that it can't be cut by the graphite. This might be a little neater. It will work either way. There's plenty of canopy clearance over here. Sort of your preference as to how you want to plumb it. At this point though, the fuel tank's ready to go. Now we're going to put the main gear in.